Who's hosting?
I don't know. I don't think we ever worked that out.
No?
No, I don't think James delegated a specific host.
Yeah. Didn't I do it last time, or am I misremembering?
I'm always in favour of John hosting myself.
I mean...
Yeah, so am I.
Sure, all right. Oh, let's see, I'm completely unprepared. So, hello, everybody. Welcome to Radio Free Nintendo. I'm your apparent host, John Lindemann. With me is Guillaume Veillette.
Hello.
And Greg Leahy.
Ahoy, hoy, everyone.
And it is September 26, 2024, and this is episode, I don't know what episode this is.
894.
894. What a great number. 6 away from 900, which we have absolutely no plans for whatsoever that I'm aware of. But
wink, wink.
That's a wink, wink, all right. As in wink, wink, we need to figure something out, wink, wink.
Yes.
Yes, but enough of that. I am not James. James tends to like to talk a lot about how the sausage is made, but that's not me. I prefer to not reveal any behind-the-scenes stuff from this podcast, the inner workings of this podcast.
Yeah, keep the sausage mysterious.
Yes, keep it very mysterious.
Mystery sausage, if you will. Yeah.
This mystery sausage of a podcast. We're going to keep it as mysterious as possible. So... I guess what we're going to do, we're going to have a little new business, and then after the break, do some email. So, new business, I think we're going to start off with Greg.
Sure, yeah, well, it's shouldn't be a terrible surprise to everybody listening that the first thing we're going to talk about is The Legend of Zelda Echoes of Wisdom, especially because, of course, this has been true for a bit, but I think this might be the first time it's really come into play, the fact that Nintendo has moved the day that its first-party games go live on the eShop, the launch dates. So now that it's a day earlier in the week, that we actually have a more substantial kind of period of time when something comes out before we start recording to get our hands on it. So yeah, rather
I don't think I ever realized that this was happening. Like, people were starting to talk about this game just last night, and I was like, how are you playing it this early? What's going on?
It caught me off guard too. I thought, because in my mind, I saw that it was September 26th, but then I was like, wait a minute, that's not today, and I'm reading this on a Wednesday. So that means it's coming out on a Thursday. That's really strange. So
no, it's been an awfully long time where goodness knows how often down the years we've had it where it's like, well, it went live a couple of hours ago, and I've seen the title screen, and at some point you press start, and then you move through that, and try and drag it out as much as possible. But yeah, it's always pretty modest, the level of insight that you can offer, and I mean, it's not like I put a ton of time in the whole day plus a couple of hours that we've been afforded now, thanks to this change in the way they release stuff. But certainly, you've got a fair bit better kind of, some more substantial kind of chunk of the opening of the game to talk about. I mean, really, a lot of the stuff that I've seen is stuff that they have shown either, in that very first teaser, from the Nintendo Direct, with the whole scenario of, kind of starting with that, Symphony of the Night, starting with the end of Rondo Blood type of thing, where, we kind of have what we think of as the end game for this kind of series is actually the kind of tutorial, all of that. And then some more things that they showed in kind of, succeeding little videos and stuff, online about like the bind power, where you can like shoot out your little, buddy character Try or whatever, and kind of, create a connection with some inanimate object, and you can use that to move it or to like bind your movement to its movement, or so all that kind of stuff that was shown is not surprisingly parceled out really early. So it's mostly just kind of getting hands on with that stuff and seeing how it works and whatnot. So yeah, nothing terribly kind of deep, but the kind of the observations I guess you can make so far is just, even in that period of time in which I've kind of done effectively like the first dungeon. You know, it's very, very much, you know, kind of a traditional dungeon, even though this takes a lot of cues from, you know, the Tears of the Kingdom, Breath of the Wild, you know, open world games. We have some pretty, you know, Link's Awakening-ish dungeons here, even, you know, with the paradigm of, like, having those kind of 2D sections, you know, the side-on sections, I should say, as well as, you know, the top-down stuff. Like, it's very much doing all that. But, you know, just having done that and kind of working my way towards a second one where it seems like you've got a choice of which kind of part of the world you want to go investigate next. So, certainly, again, seems like there's more linearity than the ultra, you know, kind of free, the 3D games, if you like. But, you know, they're trying to offer you some kind of choice there, some kind of agency. But even just in that time, it's already like, yeah, I've copied, you know, they've made echoes of all these different enemies and objects. And it's already getting like the unwieldy UI, you know, the menu of, what shall I attach to this arrow? One of, you know, 150 different things I can scroll across from Tears of the Kingdom.
Yeah, I took account. So I also picked this up. Guy, do you have this or not? Did you pick up Echoes of Wisdom?
No, I haven't.
Right.
I had an expensive week, and I decided to hold off.
Okay. I would have said the same, but of course Nintendo emailed me and said, hey, you still have a voucher to burn that expires on October the 17th. And Greg and I were talking about this prior to the podcast, that was probably the voucher that we bought for Super Mario Wonder last year. So I had that to burn, and so, you know, just by happenstance, I looked on the eShop and I said, hey, there's Echoes of Wisdom, and so I picked it up. But yeah, that's where I'm at right now, Greg. I'm just before Soothorn Ruins. So that first dungeon is where I just saved my game, and I already have 18 different things to go through. And of course, I don't know when that menu comes up. So you choose which item. I think with the left bumper, the left shoulder bumper. And I don't know how that list scrolls, but right now it just goes 18 across, and you can sort it, I guess, but it's pretty unwieldy even now at the very beginning of the game.
No, that's kind of what I'm thinking. Like, those are a bit further along, and I haven't done a count, but yeah, I assume it's running a bit deeper. I mean, it seems like you have like additional like versions of things as well. Like, for instance, like, you know, like one of the things that they showed in the first trailer, and one of the first things you'll get to copy in the game is a sort of fairly ordinary looking bed. Right, and that's it's useful because you could kind of use it as a bridge, the building like a staircase or a bridge across stuff,
and heal in it
to traverse. But yeah, you can heal in it as well, which is kind of interesting actually, because, you know, it does. Yeah, it's in many ways it seems like a pretty traditional kind of top-down Zelda game. You've got the 3 hearts to start, you know, which is, it always feels a little bit kind of tight early on, and you know, like, I think there's like items of clothing you can get in this that offer certain buffs, and one of them, the one piece that I've got so far is like, it makes hearts appear more often. But it's kind of interesting that also is like, well, at any time you can spawn a thing that lets you heal, like there and then. Now, that isn't to say it's not without restrictions, because I guess it is very slow. So, I mean, there's just the inconvenience of it, of just kind of like having to wait for someone to lie there until they kind of regain hearts. But of course, what that does mean as well is, let's say, for instance, if you're in the middle of a battle with a boss or a bunch of enemies, well, then unless you've spawned a bunch of other stuff to keep them very busy, like, if eventually they're going to come and get you in bed, you won't be able to just kind of heal uninterrupted. So it's kind of interesting, I guess. I mean, again, certainly, you know, if you're like kind of gone through a part in a dungeon or something, and you've just finished off the enemies, and they're, you know, it's all quiet, but you've been left with very little health. Well, that's pretty much the perfect opportunity to use the bed to recover your health. But what I've seen is there's like a nicer bed. And like with some of the enemies, there's like, oh, there's a, like, I don't know, a more robust version of this enemy. It takes more damage or does more damage or something. Like, so, I mean, given that that's the case, you know, that some of these things are going to have variance and they, you know, and that's just early on in the game, and they have discrete kind of icons on that menu. I mean, it's how long is it going to get?
I don't know.
It seems crazy.
Yeah, it goes on for a long time already, and I don't know. You, like I said, you do have the sword option, but I don't know what that does. Like if it breaks them down by category or what. It seems to kind of rearrange them by what you've used most recently. I noticed that.
Yes, yeah, and that's like a little bit, and what it also means is like, as you because again, what you can kind of do with this, even more so, I guess, than like probably regular top-down Zeldas, is you could kind of, if not outright ignore an enemy, you can just spawn something to kind of keep it, to just not necessarily kill it, but just distract it, and then you move past it. But they do still kind of want to give you a reason to kill the things, you know, to actually engage. And sometimes that'll be, okay, you're in a dungeon, we have a kill room, right? You must kill them all to open the door or whatever. Or sometimes you get, again, very kind of like Tears of the Kingdom, Breath of the Wild kind of like, oh, there's a bunch of enemies where there's a chest up on a wooden platform. So if you want that, you've got to kill all the enemies that are guarding it. You know, so you got that thing. But also, like, the most sort of immediate thing is that you have to kill something, if we're talking about an enemy, to be able to copy it. Like with objects, if you just see a copyable kind of object, which sometimes you could just walk into like a house and, you know, someone will have something that's like, it's got this like golden kind of shimmer to it that means you can copy it. But with enemies, you got to kill something to like, it's to spawn this like essence, this little version of it that then you can copy that. So that kind of, every time you see something new, you're going to be like, okay, I want to take that out, pretty quickly. So I can learn a new thing, see what it does, see how it can help me. And then the other part of it is, you know, early on, and again, this is something they showed in videos before the game released, so I'm kind of comfortable enough talking about it here. They showed the fact that you can take on essentially like a Link-like form, like, you know, you kind of your regular kind of, you know, because you play as Link in that you know, sort of quasi-tutorial, you know, bit at the start that they showed initially. And then, you know, you lose that ability, you take over as Zelda, but pretty quickly you gain the ability to like temporarily play more like Link. So it's like your jump is better, you can use the sword, you know, and it's way more immediate to kill enemies, but it's all like running on a kind of a meter. So, like, you can't just do that willy-nilly. It's something you got to keep in reserve for when you really want it. And I think, like, what can happen is if you deplete that meter, one of the ways you can replenish it is by killing stuff as Zelda, you know, as Zelda by spawning, you know, various things, you know, whatever it might be, spawning a dark nut to kill something for you. And then that produces some of this stuff. So it's kind of trying to get a bit of a back and forth there of like, okay, you're going to use that Link mode at times because it's going to make it easier to traverse parts of the environment. It's going to make it easier to kill certain things, but you can't just do it at will. And you kind of need to get into the rhythm and the kind of flow of like, you know, managing like when to use it, when not, and how to kill stuff other ways. And that's been one of the more interesting parts of these early hours.
Yeah. Well, what I liked was that I thought that the controls were really intuitive. Nothing felt strange or awkward. Everything kind of made sense, especially right at the start when you're operating as Link, which, you know, apparently I haven't seen this yet, but, you know, that comes into play. Everything just kind of made sense where I was doing things, but I was using certain buttons to do certain things before they even explained to me that that was the button I was supposed to use. So I think they did a really good job there.
Well, I kind of find it interesting, and I think this is not something I was necessarily thinking about going in, and I don't know that they should, I don't think I saw everything from the pre-release videos and whatnot, because I was fairly likely to buy it, so I didn't, feel like, and especially, when the reviews came in the day before or whatever, they seemed very complimentary and all that. That was pretty much that, but the kind of, the lock-on in a top-down game, I thought was an interesting kind of... and again, it works like the way you would expect, right? You're so used to like pressing, like, obviously it was Z targeting back in the day, but, the back left shoulder, to target something. It's like, top-down game, what do you need to target stuff for? But it's actually quite useful because especially that really early going when you don't have a lot of things copied yet to just spawn and kind of do your dirty work for you. A lot of it is like, okay, pick up a rock and throw it at something, or spawn a rock and throw that at something. And if that's the way you're trying to kill things, well, you don't want to keep missing. Because that's, it's just that one of the risks of this, sort of approach that they've adopted where, it's like all these different things you could spawn and you're picking from this growing long list of different things, is it kind of hurts the flow. Right. And if you had to be really careful about aiming, at each individual enemy, I think that would only add to the risk of like it getting bogged down, with like too much, having to feel like precise and stuff. But with that lock on, like it really felt like you couldn't miss. Like it's just like, no, I'm not going if I throw a rock at that little, choo-choo or whatever, it's going to hit it. And that felt like it just kind of smoothed things and kind of kept the pace nice. And it comes into play in other ways as well in terms of that bind power that I talked about, where you've got to kind of cast your, kind of sidekick out to kind of make that connection with the object or enemy before you can kind of start interacting with it. Again, you can lock on to do that. So again, it's like if there's a bunch of different stuff in the room with you at the same time, it's not going to go at one that you don't expect, or like you lock on the one you want, you do it, it's easy. So it's kind of, especially when you've got like that little bit of, even from the different games like 3D games, that bit of muscle memory of like lock on and then kind of go for something. That works. It's intuitive. It works nicely for an experienced Zelda player.
Yeah. Now, speaking of 2D, I thought it was interesting that they play with perspective a little bit, where they have the sort of almost isometric kind of 2.5D view of the overworld, and then in certain instances you'll go down. I wouldn't even say, because it really does differ. If you go underground, some of them are actually 2.5D, and then some of them are straight on 2D.
The side on,
side scrolling.
Like, yeah. I guess, that goes back to the original Zelda, right? Like that is, where they had some of that. But it really is, because this is such a kind of outgrowth, if you like, of the Link's Awakening remake on Switch from 5 years ago. Is it really that long?
Wow.
They've just picking up where they left off with that, because it's Grezzo again, who were developing it, and it didn't have to. They could have left that, kind of part of, obviously that was just recreating the way Link's Awakening did. I believe the Oracle games had some stuff, similar things in as well.
Yeah, Zelda 2 as well. That's pretty much what Zelda 2 was. You had the overworld.
Zelda 2 kind of took that from the original game, and so we'll do it all side scrolling. But it's kind of, I've been a little bit surprised, not that they're in it at all, because he kind of felt like, if this is very much like, let's take what we learned doing a remake of Link's Awakening and make an original game, but that's still kind of the foundation. So it's not a surprise to me that those bits are present, but they seemed a bit more emphasized than I would have thought. Quite a lot of stuff with some of the more substantial, like puzzles and things so far have, been in that perspective and stuff. So yeah, that was kind of interest as well.
Yeah, there's a lot of, like just a little bit I've seen of it is there's a lot of, hey, drop this rock, climb up onto this ledge, drop this rock onto a box, the box gets destroyed, and then you can go down further. So yeah, it's interesting. It's more than just I mean, you talked about older Zelda games. Those were more of, okay, we're just going to have you go down into this area just so it's something difficult. It's just a difficult obstacle. But yeah, these are more kind of expanded areas where there's some definite puzzle solving underneath in this kind of 2D presentation. So it's
well, I guess the interesting thing, one of the interesting things about it so far as well is like, is how much of it in the really early going is like, okay, you know, if you played Zelda games before, this is something that you've done, but you're going to have to do it in a somewhat different way.
Yeah.
You know, so there's that component because that you don't necessarily have the same ability to just like directly interact, or you don't have like the bunch of sub items like, you know, a boomerang or a hook shot or all that kind of stuff. But you have, you know, you have enemies that you could summon that do some similar things. I mean, one of the kind of, early kind of kill rooms I was in was one where there was a bunch of enemies. And you know, you just go, it's simple enough, right? You just got to kill them, and then the door's going to open. We're going to move on. But one of them was up really high, and it's like, okay, so I guess, you know, I'll make the little, you know, footstool thing, and then, you know, make another one, and we'll make a staircase. I'll go up there and kill it. But then I just thought, well, let's try something else. And I spawned. I think I'd recently copied this thing, the Dark Nut, right? So it's this big, heavy enemy that swings like an axe. And you know, I just picked him up over my head. Well, I tried it, and somewhat to my surprise, Zelda could lift this massive, you know, armor thing up over her head. And then it was
maybe
high
they're
enough.
mostly empty. I don't know.
Well, yeah, because she could possess sort of similar armor suits in Spirit Tracks, you know. But you hoist it over the head, and then it could just kill the enemy from there, from just, you know, you didn't have to build anything. But I certainly could have done as well, you know, and that's the point, the sort of embracing the whole kind of multi-solution kind of philosophy that exists in, you know, the Tears of the Kingdom, Breath of the Wild games. But still now, you know, in a more linear kind of dungeons, seemingly, you know, because that's the thing, you know, the commitment to non-linearity in Breath of the Wild and even Tears of the Kingdom, which, you know, the dungeon type things in Tears of the Kingdom are a bit more, you know, have moved somewhat closer to what we think of as, you know, pre-Breath of the Wild Zelda dungeons, but not quite, because it still had this kind of like, okay, there's 5 or 4 or, you know, sort of things to do in this dungeon in any order. And, you know, which was not something that would be true before Breath of the Wild. It's like, whatever it is that you're doing, we want to give you the ability to kind of do it in any order. What you have here is, you know, the ability to do things in different ways, but it is a linear dungeon. You know, you're going through in a particular order, and that lets them. It'll be interesting how it plays out with the more advanced stuff, because obviously it's pretty, you know, it's nothing too advanced yet. It's just getting everybody, you know, acclimated with the systems and how it works and all that. But what that gives you the opportunity to do in terms of iterating on puzzle concepts, how well can you do that when you're also committed to having them be solved in multiple ways? That's really one of the questions I've got to see how it develops from that perspective.
Yeah, I noticed early on that, I mean, there's only, I think it seems like there's a cap on how many objects you can have spawned at any one time. And
yeah,
I'm assuming over time that gets expanded, so the puzzles theoretically would become more complex.
Yes, that I've already seen that. You know, that is something that happens. Like, you basically, the thing, like, given certain enemies or objects like cost more, and so like you start with essentially with like 3 sort of points essentially, right? So if you spawn in 3 your simple things, you can afford 3 of them. But then if you spawn in something like that Dark Nut I talked about, well, that takes up all 3. So you can only have it on the field at once. But once you do that first dungeon, you get a 4th point. Yeah. And so now you've got a bit more flexibility. And of course, you know, I'm assuming, you know, there's going to be a number of these such dungeons throughout the game, and it's going to go to 5, 6, and so on. What's interesting is the fact that they're kind of giving you a choice in terms of what you want to tackle as like your second dungeon. That kind of means that, again, it can't be that calibrated, calibrated that tightly in the sense that, well, you couldn't have things that were dependent on like, oh, well, this is going to be your third dungeon, so you're going to have the ability to have this many objects now, because, well, it could be the second or the third. So, it seems like it's not going to be like really, really carefully kind of, well, I should say carefully, like prescriptively kind of designed in that way. It feels like it's going to try and have a bit more of an easygoing kind of thing. But obviously the other part of it, I guess, is that the more things you can kind of conjure at once, the more stress it puts on the game. Which, there's definitely, I've noticed already, just going out into the overworld and, there's like this, it's got like an armadillo enemy that you can spawn, which is fun to use offensively because it just, it spawns this fast rolling ball that bounces around everywhere and all that. But if you spawn a bunch of them at once and they start, fizzing around, like, it does affect the frame rate a bit, which is not a shock considering like, Link's Awakening, kind of had trouble in the first place, when that was obviously, it was based on, the original game. And it didn't have like as many variables as this in terms of like stuff you're conjuring at once and how they interact and like the physics of them and all that kind of stuff. It inevitably had to be a simpler game, and if it seems already like it's a more extensive, expansive kind of overworld that these things exist in and stuff. So you had to have your doubts how well that tech would hold up, and I would say so far. I was never that bothered by, there were hitches with Link's Awakening, but they weren't like really bad. But I think it's more apparent here so far. And I want it to the point of, the idea that we're going to keep gaining more these magic points for, your try or whatever, the little sprite character to make stuff. You wonder like how far, how far you can push it when you have like 7 or whatever. Like how is it going to react at that point? Yeah.
Now, does this, and since I never played the Link's Awakening remake, does this visually look a lot better than that, or is it just roughly the same?
It's very similar, very, very similar. And I mean, we've mentioned this on the show before. That is why this game exists. Yeah. It's just a case of like, okay, we have a technical foundation on which to build something so that we can, develop a game that can, has some significant sales potential and, can sort of tide Switch players over during this period where we're going to the next console without having to blow through a bunch of money or, most prized development assets to achieve it. So, it in that sense, it's no shock that it looks so similar and it maybe has some of the same kind of technical foibles. But the thing about it is the new elements that they've brought in, which, I'm very glad for, it's part of what makes it interesting and kind of freshening up. Although it's not like we've had that many top-down Zeldas that they, it's not like the 6th side-scrolling Castlevania game in like 6 years or whatever it was back on DS and GBA. But, it's nice to have some things to freshen it up, but it does fit. Maybe it's going a little bit beyond, what that technical foundation could handle very well. So I think I said this about the Link's Awakening on Switch, but it's even a bit more surprising here. I'm surprised they didn't just cap it at a lower frame rate. It seems like they're going for, it feels like they try, it's trying to hit 60-ish, here or there, but it can't really do it, that consistently. And I suppose I should mention, I think with Link's Awakening, the problems were more pronounced if you played docked, and I played handheld. So when I say it wasn't really an issue for me. Some of that is just because it's not the kind of game that it really bothers me, having any kind of hitches, but if it's like when we talked about the Contra demo for Switch, like that's a bit of a different kettle of fish when it's that kind of game that's having like hitches and stuff. But the other part of it is it probably just wasn't as bad because I almost play exclusively in handheld with that.
Yeah, and I'm noticing that too. I mean, when I was just playing it docked, but last night I was playing it. I was playing it, off the dock, and when you play docked, it's like, why is the frame rate? Why does it just keeps dropping ever so slightly, just so that it's noticeable. Nothing really bad, doesn't interfere with gameplay, but it's just this constant kind of roller coaster where. You hop up on this ledge and the frame rate drops and then comes back. And it's just a constant kind of thing. But I think this one is really, really meant to be played best. Just walking around mobile with this guy, I think.
Yeah, I think so. I also think maybe the whole like perspective and the colors and the whole thing that they're trying to do where it's almost like it's, a miniature. It's someone's made like a little miniature Hyrule with little, sort of figures on it and stuff. Like it just, I don't know whether that whole, it depends what setup you've got, obviously. And, people have their preferences, but I think on every level, it probably is more suitable to playing portably. But I'm still a little bit surprised because they have, sometimes just kind of accepted it and capped it at 30. Like, I mean, pretty much every Kirby game for a long time was 60, but then when they did Star Allies, where multiplayer was like the whole game, they just capped it at 30, I think. And just, it would be too unstable otherwise. And then even something like Paper Mario 1000 Year Door, just recently, the remake. Whereas I think other paper, HD Paper Mario games, whatever, run at a higher frame rate, they capped that. So, I do find it a little bit surprising maybe that they did just say, look, it's, we're going a bit beyond what the technical foundations of this were made for, because they were made for that remake of a Game Boy game. So maybe we could check. But on the other hand, maybe that there's that whole process means that it's harder to do than I'm suggesting. I couldn't begin to tell you about stuff like that.
But I just think that, 30 frames per second wouldn't really affect the gameplay in this at all, just because it's a fairly slow-paced game to begin with. So it's
to this point anyway. I don't know. Yeah. Like I said, if you spawn in 7 moblins to like wreck a whole bunch of things later in the game, maybe But yeah, it's hard to. But like I said, something like Contra or a shoot 'em up or something like that. Like I would be much more sensitive to either variations or having it be a 30 kind of sort of target game. But something like this, it just doesn't seem, again, other people may feel differently, but I wouldn't seem like it would be terribly detrimental in this, and the stability would just, because it's distracting. I mean, it didn't really bother me terribly much in the Link's Awakening case, but even then it was somewhat distracting every now and again, and I just, again, we're only early on, but from what we've seen so far, I think it seems like it's going to be more of an issue here than it was there.
Yeah. Well, you wind up watching for it and saying, oh, there it is again. There it is again. So.
It's taking you out of the experience a bit, isn't it, at that point? So even if it's not like, oh, this is affecting my ability to beat this boss, it's still, a something of a detriment.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, I'm enjoying this so far. I mean, I'm glad I picked it up. I haven't played this type of game. I kind of got it on a lark just because I really haven't played this type of game for a while, and it's how my interests sort of happen. I was thinking even with open world games, I was thinking I get an interest to play an open world game maybe about once every 2 years, and then I'm good for a while. And so I haven't really played a Zelda game like this for a while, and I didn't play Link's Awakening. Even though I was interested in it, didn't pick it up. But yeah, I'm liking it so far. You have anything else to say about it, Greg?
No, I've enjoyed what I've played so far, and it's just kind of intriguing, really. Where what can you do as this stuff gets more? So you get more the abilities, essentially more things that you've copied, the ability to spawn more at once. And, how you take all these variables and kind of, make more interesting puzzles out of them. And already, just, with what I've got already, as we said, it is quite a lot of things. And when you combine that with that whole bind kind of thing, where it's like, okay, so, you could set an enemy off on in motion and then kind of let that be your tether and all that. It's like, I probably haven't even really conceived of just how many different combinations of things that could enable at this point. And yeah, a lot of it is probably just going to be multiple ways to do the same thing, but how kind of substantively varied it all feels as the game goes. That's really kind of what I'm looking forward to at this point, and see how much they can deliver on that kind of promise.
Yeah, I like how it feels really sandboxy, and parts of the world are used in such a way where you want to explore them because there might be something in there. There's very few. I go into this hut and there's nothing in there, and I just walk around and maybe pick up a jar and smash it so I can get a rupee out of it. It doesn't seem like there's too much of that so far, because there's always usually something in there, even if it's something that's doesn't seem very useful at the time. There's something in there to copy and use and just add to your toolbox. So it's cool. I'm liking it so far. Guy, what do you have for us?
Yeah, well, first of all, I finished Yakuza 0. I played probably like 90 hours, so it's a big game, and it tends to take up a lot of, as I said last week, as much time as you're going to give it, because there are so many mini games and so many side quests and everything. I didn't do everything, but at a certain point, I was like, okay, I've had enough. I'm just going to sprint through the story. So I did that, and it's not really for me a great way to end the game, because ultimately the story is in Yakuza games is not what I'm playing them for. It's it's kind of melodramatic and not super surprising. Like you kind of know what you're gonna get. It just presents a completely different character, a completely different Kiryu and Majima than the one that I'm playing. In the story, like they're pretty, like they're Yakuza, they're violent, and also like they're kind of like not white knights, but actually they're probably literally white knights, they have like they live by a code and all of that kind of stuff. But in the game that I'm playing, Kiryu and Majima are just like living their best lives, enjoying like dancing disco and becoming like kings of disco in their respective cities, beating kids at slot cars. Eventually one of them might learn mahjong at some point. Maybe I'll decide like, yeah, sure, I'll get into that. And that's the part of those games that I like. But the story scenes, like they become very violent, which is not, again, it's not unexpected. It's literally called Yakuza. But it's like personally, like you can turn off the gore in game, like in that, like you can turn off the blood. So I did that. So literally, like the violence has been very cartoony when I'm in battles. Like, sure, like I pile drive guys left and right, but like only bills come out, cash just fly out of them. Like it's not violent.
So it's kind of
it's cartoony.
The Mortal Kombat green blood.
Right, yeah. But in the story cutscenes, at some point, like there's this guy who gets tortured, and he gets tortured, and like they didn't model, like actual guts or anything like that. Like, but you do see quite a lot of blood, and like there's you don't see the sledgehammer hit the guy's toes, but that's what happens, you know.
Yeah.
And am I into that kind of stuff? Not really. The whole thing reminds me of that time when I would just buy movies sight unseen. You know, it was just like, because there was DVDs were so cheap, and I was like, oh, George Clooney, the Syriana movie. I heard good things. I'm gonna buy this. This is not a movie you rewatch over and over again. At this point, I've managed to push it out of my memory, but like there's something about fingers in there. I'm pretty sure. Not fun. So yeah, yeah, like the cutscenes tend to be overly long, and ultimately, like I kind of lose interest. Like I'm not paying super close attention. So as Yakuza 0 predictably was setting up the start of the first Yakuza game, I'm not sure if I would completely follow, like, except that they do have, like, where are they now kind of little scenes at the end, just like in the, I don't know, like, Fast Times or whatever.
Yeah, teen movies or whatever, yep.
Yeah, but so whenever they reference, like, oh, this guy in 1995 or in 2005, I know, like, oh yeah, okay, that's before and after Kiryu gets sent to prison for 10 years in the first game. Okay, but yeah, like I'm some of those guys, like I'm still not sure exactly where they stand in the Yakuza hierarchy. But yeah, like, and it's a little bit, you know, a little bit contrived, of course. Like, I'm not sure if I needed to know how Majima became the mad dog of Shimano or whatever. Like, it's not. It's a little bit weird. Like, there's pretty a sharp contrast between his character in Yakuza 0 and the first Yakuza game. Anyway, but it was, you know, overall a positive experience. I'm probably gonna keep playing this series, but not right now. I'm ready to move on to other things.
It seems like you're kind of there more for the goofy stuff than for the story and the mafia.
Oh, absolutely.
Stuff.
Yeah. 100%.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because it just seems like there's. It seems like it seems like it's a game with kind of two different tones. You know, it tries to be this sort of Goodfellas, but also, you know, but at least a Japanese version of it, but also tries to be like this very weird, almost Joker-esque sort of thing.
Yeah,
like very
it's
strange
more
stuff.
Ernest Goes to Camp. I don't know.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, Joker's
Actually,
probably way too dark. Yeah.
Yeah, but yeah, ultimately, like, I think the one I'm looking forward to playing next is Infinite Wealth, Like a Dragon, Infinite Wealth, which I think that game, that series characters are more fun, and the tone is. I don't actually remember the main story all that well, but I feel like there was less of a marked contrast between the main plot and the fact that you fight a giant Roomba at some point. You know, like it
Yeah.
it all gelled together better. It was yeah. Whereas like Yakuza 0, there's more of a whiplash. Anyway, other than that, like a few weeks ago, I got back into Cruis'n, the Raw Thrills arcade racer. I had talked about it before. I guess this update is just to say that I've played it, you know, like in couch co-op. At some point, the developer, you know, said like, maybe we'll do, like, if we can, we'll make an update to you know, have online racing. I don't think it would have been especially worthwhile. And also at this point, it's been several years. I don't think it's happening. I haven't heard anything, but exactly, I haven't heard anything. It's been years. So I don't think it's happening. The weird thing about playing that game 2 players is that first, I was kind of surprised, but Karen was really into it. But I guess I shouldn't be surprised. Like, there's something very fun about driving a Triceratops against like a UFO and other real life cars, you know, like through absolutely bonkers environments. The other thing, though, is that this game is not, it's an arcade racer, like in the purest sense. And so there's no, it's almost not a racer, you know, emphasis on arcade. Like, it's not racing mechanics. You're not competing to outdrive your opponents. It's really just like you try not to crash too often. And if you manage to do that, eventually, like at almost set intervals on the course, you're going to catch up with like these two guys, and then these two other guys, and then these two other guys. And then at the very end, when you're very close to the finish line, you get, you're in third place, and you try to again, just just make it past the first two guys, and then you win. But because the game is this way, it doesn't really matter if you have like all the different vehicles have different stats, including different like acceleration and top speeds. But it kind of all comes out in the wash. Like, it doesn't really matter all that much. And yeah, because of this structure, player 1, player 2 are basically have the same rubber banding, So what happens is that Karen and I are always in each other's way when we're racing. Like, you cannot get away from the other player because you're both just competing against the game structure, which is just like, okay, like you're at this point on the track, you're, if you manage not to crash too much, like you're going to become 7th place at this point, And so, it's a little bit annoying because like you don't want to be in your like we were basically cooperating, right? Like we're trying to have one of us win, not like we were not really competing against each other directly. We were doing the world tours. We were trying to unlock vehicles and stuff. And but like there's no getting away from each other, and then like kind of like, oh, okay, sorry, I hit you. Oh, sorry, It's just, but that's what happens. So yeah, like it's kind of, it was a lot of fun, and ultimately, like, it's maybe not as bad as I make it sound, but it is something that's a weird thing about this game. Like,
I have not played it multiplayer, but I've played it, and I can imagine, what quite easily that's the way it would be, because, like you said, it's not very organic, or chaotic. It's like this almost scripted kind of journey through the field. You're never going to just like I'm off to a great start and I'm ahead of everybody. Like, no, that's never how it works. And so that same script is going to play out for the two human players, and you're presumably going to end up bound together, to a fair degree. I mean, it's one of these things. I can remember playing, F-Zero X with friends, and you kind of had the opposite problem, right? Of just like, well, a lot of the time, because that game does not have red shells, blue shells, the stuff that Mario Kart has to bring people back together. Is if somebody gets off to a good start and, whatever, like that they're gone. Like, we're playing multiplayer, but we may as well not be playing together at this point, because unless they just, especially because F-Zero X multiplayer, you don't have the 30 car feel to mess people up so much. It's just like, oh, no, they're out in front and they might die. I mean, there's that, because F-Zero X tracks are quite dangerous, but you're not necessarily going to get that much interaction. And, in a way, you might almost wish for something like what you're talking about. But yeah, you can, there are some issues if it goes too far, and it's just like, well, we can almost literally not get out of each other's way.
Yeah. I find that even not even arcade racers suffer from that. I mean, even games like any of the Forza games, Gran Turismo, especially if you're playing against a computer. I mean, generally, like, you have a small window to get into like the top 3 cars, and if you don't, it's over. It's just completely irrelevant. So AI in racing games is so bad.
Yeah, but this is, like Greg said, like, this is different in that, like, you're never gonna have a great start and be first right away. Like, it's basically like at set intervals on the track, you're meant to overtake, like groups of 2 cars every time. It's weird. But
the thing about that is, I like the elements of that. I almost wish we could have like a separate Mario Kart like single player mode where it was more like that. Because the Grand Prix, sort of single player stuff with Mario Kart, it's okay. But obviously with the whole like kind of chaos of it, having to kind of conform with what's there for local multiplayer. And of course, for the past many Mario Kart's online multiplayer, it's not that great of a structure for a single player experience. It ends up boiling down to, you've just got to race so well that it can hit you with 3 blue shells and it won't matter, which, it certainly encourages you to master the game, but, it's not, I don't know, something where like it was, they actually meaningfully change the balance of the items or the structure of the way the field is kind of stratified that you're racing against. That was a little bit more like, this is a single player experience. We are tailoring it, tuning it for people to actually, but it would be kind of more satisfying to me at this point. But obviously that's never the main attraction with a Mario Kart game, so it's not desperately important, but that's kind of one of the things. Similar enjoyment I had to play Cruis'n Blast would have been playing the Excite Truck and Bots games, back in on the Wii, because they were similar, weren't they? In terms of, they had the added element there that it wasn't really only about finishing well. It was about doing all a bunch of stunts and, kind of, showing off driving, ostentatious dickery driving. I'm driving between a bunch of, trees. I'm driving off a giant ramp and then landing the car and all this kind of stuff. It actually felt like, no, this is, a kind of a racing game. I think there was some multiplayer, at least in Excitebot. I'm trying to remember. There must have been some multiplayer in those games, but it felt like a game that was actually really thinking about single player, about how can we make a single player arcade style race of fun. And that's what, I got out of Cruis'n Blast, was kind of going back to that.
Yeah, I'll end on this. When you're playing, split screen co-op, the game runs still super well. Of course, it's probably due to what we just talked about. Like your cars are basically treated as one vehicle. Like the game doesn't have to render 2 spots on the track at once. You're both seeing mostly the same stuff. So I'm sure that makes the whole thing easier to process, to generate the tracks. So anyway, but yeah, like we had fun, and then we moved on to, Double Dragon, which we're still playing. Quickly, one last game that I've been playing, I started recently, Lil Gator Game, which, I had heard some good things about on podcasts, and then, Johnny Metz, Dr. Metz, on Blue Sky, I assume, said like, oh, have you checked this game out? Like, this is such a Guillaume game. So I was like, oh, cool. But I was already mired in Yakuza, so, I only got around to playing it now. One thing that people are doing now online, like the latest fad, is that they'll say something and then put in parenthesis like derogatory or complimentary, like, oh, this guy is a psycho, in parenthesis like complimentary or whatever, or anyway, like, this game is sick. I guess
it's always has been a little bit of a problem with regard to, in text, you don't have voice inflection to like do that work for you, I guess. So
right. But this is like definitely like a fad, like trying to, yeah, like it's kind of a little joke that's going around. Like people try different combinations, like different phrases. I would say, like, yes, Lil Gator Game is very much a Guillaume game. Parenthesis derogatory. Unfortunately, it's all right. I don't hate it, but I don't love it. This is a game where you're playing as, a little kid who's in the world of anthropomorphic animals. You're a little alligator, and you're sister who went to college is back for, I guess, the holidays, but she's working on a paper. You know, you used to, like, you're obviously very young. I'm guessing like preteen. And all you want to do is to play with her the way that you used to before she left. I guess, like, they used to make a you know, kind of their make-believe, like we're playing Legend of Zelda with the serial names, you know, the serial number filed off. Like we're playing Hero in the forest and in our backyard that turns out to be like full of islands and giant mountains that you can climb and fall off of without fall damage, and etc. Anyway, so you were, you know, making up your own adventures with your sister. And but so now, like, she's back and you want to make the most out of that long weekend by having her play with you, but she's too busy actually doing college work. Your buddies, so apparently, like, you had previously asked your buddies to make up like cardboard cutouts of monsters and, you know, place them around the forest and etc. to, you know, basically the plan, because you kind of expected her to not be into it, like try to remind her of how much fun it used to be to play together. And so by seeing how much fun you're having, like, maybe you can convince her to drop her laptop and to play with you. But, like, so concretely, what happens is that you've got this, you know, big area where it's just basically, as I said, like different islands, like mountains, and lots and lots and lots and lots of cardboard cutout monsters that just don't do anything. They're just, you know, they're just standing there. That's literally what they're for. The first few missions that you're sent on, you have to go find a hat, you know, a Link hat, basically, a sword that turns out to be a stick, and a shield, which you don't use as a shield because there's no combat in this game. There's no actual enemies, just cardboard cutouts, but the shield does allow you to slide down slopes. So you get that, and then what you do is that you can, with your stick, slash the cardboard cutouts to get cardboard bits, I guess, confetti out of them, and that becomes your currency to then, like, as you play through the game, you unlock the option to buy a different hat, a different shield, maybe with a special effect, like you know, like a painter's palette that just becomes like, if you slide with it, I guess it leaves a color trail behind you. But also, like, instead of like a shield, like, it can be like at some point you get a life preserver, and so when you slide and, like, you reach a water, if you time the pressing the jump button with the skipping on the water, you can just keep skipping, and so you cross the water very, very quickly. So this game is mostly about climbing. There is a system where you get the, you know, like, you can improve your stamina to climb for longer and for, you know, ever higher. And always, like, you have to spend some of your currency, and you have to find a little dude, a little monkey dude, who will give you bracelets that turn out to be the rings that represent your stamina. And I've mostly described the whole game, so it's
well,
you know, like,
say,
it does.
On Wikipedia, it says that there's side quests that were inspired by Yakuza.
Are there?
I guess you tell me. Have you encountered that? Have you been saying, boy, oh boy, this is just like that side quest in Yakuza 0?
I really haven't. No, because there's only one type of side quest here, and it's always a fetch quest or a go destroy these things. Like, oh, like the some kid will pretend because they're part of the game, or someone asks them to be part of your game, and so, like, oh, please take care of the monsters, and so you slash the monsters around him, and, like, okay, I'll be your friend now. So you kind of, like, rack up friends and money as you do that, and eventually I don't know, like basically make numbers go up that way, and that might unlock a new shield to slide on or whatever. That's all it is. Like sometimes like the most complex thing I've done was maybe I had to slash the cardboard cutouts of pots and leave the actual pots, because there are pots, untouched. And so yeah, I did that, and the person was actually like, before I knew that that would be a quest, I had already slashed a pot, so I kind of failed at that, but it didn't seem to matter. Just the character was like, oh, well, you destroyed one of them. Well, now the rest of them are kind of useless unless you have the full set, it's not as special, so you can go ahead and destroy them too. So basically, like, the whole gameplay is just like, slash your stick at stuff that you can destroy, collect the currency, and unlock, mostly cosmetic upgrades. And so yeah, there's not a whole lot to it. The game is very physicsy, like the character has that inertia that you might have in a game like Human Fall Flat or something like that. So it doesn't play badly, but it's not like a very satisfying 3D platformer to me, like it's a little bit too, too physicsy. I don't know, like too much inertia, too much, I don't know. It doesn't feel great to me. It's not I wouldn't call this a platformer, Mm-hmm. And yeah, like there's no combat, as I said. You just slash your like you just keep mashing the button to swing your stick around to destroy something. And because of the the inertia dimension, like when you turn around, like you just like keep mashing. You run into the cardboard cutout that you want to destroy, usually at a group together. And when you miss one, it's annoying, like it's not fun to be slashing at the cardboard cutouts, and it's annoying to have to turn back to go and finish the one that you missed. So I'm not enamored with the gameplay. And the world of the game, like it's got like the anthropomorphic characters, it's got like plenty to climb. You could think like, oh, okay, like it's maybe like a little bit a short walk-ish. A short hike-ish, sorry. A game that I loved. But like it's too big for that. And a short hike was a little bit smarter about its side quests and its missions and what you have to do. And it's so much more compact. And if you wanted to just make it to the top of the mountain, you could, because the mountain is always like at the center of the screen. Like, you can orient yourself in that game, because like basically you're always kind of going around this mountain, and eventually like you can find shortcuts and everything, but you'll make your way to the top. In Lil Gator Game, it's too big, it's too sprawling, and everything, like I can't seem to find my bearing, because like one mountain looks like the other mountain, looks like the other mountain. You only know where you've been because you've destroyed all the cardboard cutouts. So if you see some in the distance, you're like, okay, I haven't been there, I guess. You go there, it's essentially the same place. Like, it's not like a drastically different location, but you haven't been there, so you're going to find some more stuff to some more currency to upgrade to, in service of what I don't really know. To kind of have the story unfold. I'm not super into it, like I get what it's doing, but it's not exactly gripping. There's one nice little thing in that, like, you're not always interacting with like kooky characters that are, either reluctantly playing your game or eagerly playing your game, or that you're trying to convince to play your game. There's also sometimes like these kind of ghostly figures of you and your sister, and so you can, if you press the button to interact with them when you're close to them, like basically like they're memories of you playing together, and so that's kind of sweet. But I don't really, you can probably tell I'm not super into this.
No, I guess like what is the point that the game is trying to kind of make? Is it sort of like, is it bittersweet or what?
I'm guessing that like the sister is not going to drop college to come play with her kid to her kid brother. Like
Yeah.
it seems to be working towards like you're going to do a little bit of growing up. Like already like the themes are like some of your friends, they seem to be like, it's hard to tell because they're anthropomorphic animals. So like it's hard to tell their ages, but like one of them is more into their studies. The other is like trying to hang out with cool teens. And so there's, yeah, like I think that there's very much this theme of like growing up and like, wanting to, like the importance of play, but also maybe like the fact that eventually you kind of grow out of that. But also maybe you shouldn't do it too quickly. I don't know. I don't know what the game's thesis is yet.
The moral of the story.
I'm not sure but I'm not sure if I'm going to make it to that point.
Yeah.
Because ultimately I'm not super. It doesn't talk to me all that much. Speak to me. I mean.
Yep.
So. Yeah, it's all right. Thank you, Johnny, for recommending it. Like I was gonna check it out. I'm not, like cursing Johnny for
you can if you want.
A bad game.
I'm not gonna stop you.
I guess. Like it does its thing. It's ultimately not exactly hitting the right spot for me. But yeah, it's on Game Pass for free. Otherwise, it's on Switch. I haven't heard bad things about that port, but I haven't played it personally, so I can't vouch for it.
Yeah.
But obviously, I'm not recommending that you check it out. But don't let me stop you. If you were gonna, maybe I'm just,
little hater game
being
I
jaded.
guess?
Yeah, being jaded Guillaume sometimes. He comes out occasionally.
Occasionally.
Yeah.
All right. Anything else, Gil?
Almost never. No, that's it.
Okay. All right, cool. I think I'm going to skip myself this week. I have been playing FC25, which is just usually a love-hate relationship, as anybody that plays those games can tell you. It's not really what you enjoy, it's what you tolerate. But more on that next week. So on the other side of the break, we will have some emails. So we'll see you in just a moment. All right, and we're back on Radio Free Nintendo with some listener mail. I will read the first listener mail here. Which is from Spencer, a.k.a. Pokepal, in our forums, a long-time listener. I don't know if that equates to any level of wisdom. But, to the strange voices in my head, Pokepal writes, I am currently in the process of shelling out an unthinkable amount of money on a Frankenstein modded, backwards-compatible PS3. The TLDR is that the Frankenstein mod is a way to drastically prolong the life of a PS3 by swapping out the highly failure-prone 95nm GPU for a much more reliable 40nm or 65nm GPU that was pillaged from one of the slim models. It's an extremely difficult mod to perform. There is no guarantee the PS3 will even survive the process. And the only reasons I'm willing to shell this kind of money out on this is that I have a bit of an affinity for Sony's $599 magnum opus in general, and consider it one of the best looking consoles ever made, along with the fact that my PS2, which this unimaginable money pit would replace in addition to my current PS3, is my last console that still uses any kind of non-HDMI output. I also just find it really weird to have a separate PS3 and PS2 when a fairly significant portion of the PS3's library consists of remasters and collections of PS2 games. While I go cry about my poor financial decisions, as I spend far more than $599 to get this PS3, I hope to be consoled by hearing about what everyone on the RFN cast has thrown unreasonable amounts of money at throughout their gaming careers, both for the stuff that was worth it and the stuff that just didn't pan out. Your brother in Horus, Pokepal. I guess I'm not too sure if I might have clipped
No. That's how
Is that it?
do
Okay.
it usually. Yeah, I could have left out the your brother and Horace, but yeah. Anyway,
Could you?
why would I do that? Yeah, exactly.
Why would you do that? Yeah, I agree. That's why I had to read it.
Yeah, so we waited for you, John, to be back on the podcast to tackle this specific question.
I don't think this topic is germane to me whatsoever. At all. Yeah, I mean, I've spent a little money over the years here and there on a couple of things. Have I regretted some of it? Yes. But, what is a life lived without regrets? Am I right? Anybody?
Sure.
Anybody? All right. So maybe there is a certain Master Chief helmet somewhere in my apartment right now that I probably regret buying. But it's sort of like, the Rime of the Ancient Mariner, where like the albatross is hanging off of the guy and that's his burden to bear. Well, that's my albatross.
But that's hardly like, it didn't sink you, right? Like it's not,
No, I mean, I don't know. I think really for me, probably the biggest thing that I've just sunk money into is having to just a lot of games, the same games across multiple consoles. I look at I have so many games in my Xbox library just across, especially, what I think what I regret really is sinking as much money into their 360 backwards compatible library as I did, because I really went hog wild. Now, mind you, I did it in as fiscally responsible and irresponsible way as I could by waiting until games were on sale for really, really low amounts, like $5 or less. But man, those Xbox backwards compatible games, I really will probably never play those.
Yeah.
For the most part. I have so many of them and I will just never get to them. So.
Yeah, I played Psychonauts, the first one, because I do like that developer's games, and I played Psychonauts 2, so might as well check out the first one, and it was a good way to experience it with the the improved load times and the resolution. But I tried to go back to something like Time Splitters 2, and it was a great game back in the day, but I'm not used to those controls anymore, and I can't expend the energy it would take to get back into that kind of gameplay where the reticle was not what's the word? Not dissociated, but yeah, the reticle could move freely within the screen, and then like you kind of push the boundaries of the screen to kind of turn your head left and right. It's very weird today. Like it's not something that they try to do anymore. And yeah, I don't want to deal with it ultimately.
Yeah. It feels like a genre that they've kind of perfected, and I feel like there was a certain point in time where they nailed it. And every game afterwards took that model and just, iterated on it and adapted it. And it's really hard to go back. There's certain games that are very, very hard to go back to these days. So I can kind of see why Xbox, I can see why they did it for suckers like me. I can see why they brought out all the Xbox compatible games, just because, there's a lot of fondness for the 360. And so they were kind of cashing in on nostalgia, and people like me that I'm a big kind of collector when it comes to stuff like that. Not really so much with like physical stuff, but like really with stuff like that. I like to have a complete library so I can look at it and theoretically in my mind say, man, I could play any of these games if I wanted to. The reality is I'm not going to play any of them, but it's just, I have that sort of, that compulsion in me to say, I want this whole collection of games. Even if I don't play it, I have the option to. I just like to have the option. Like, I like to have the option to play Elder Scrolls Oblivion on 5 different platforms, if I so choose. Choose, because that's my choice.
Other than the cat helmet, I think that had to come up, didn't it? Just the number of different games. But I guess that's the thing. For me, Probably the biggest expenditures were not mine. They were my parents when I was young and we were getting imports. I mean, especially I think N64 had to be the apex of it because, you know, I think just conditions or whatever with the economy, the exchange rate at the time. I think it was, you know, the sterling was pretty weak at that point. You know, obviously it's been on a bit of a roller coaster in the decades hence, but I think, you know, they would have paid about 500 quid in mid 90s money for the N64 in the summer of 96. You know, that was a lot, but you know, it didn't go to waste, I wouldn't say, because there was a substantial difference in the experience back then of, you know, if you had a PAL N64, you would have had to wait the better part of 9 months and then also deal with the fact that, you know, the games were slower, they were letterboxed, the colour reproduction wasn't going to be as good. I mean, it just, you know, it was an inferior experience. So, you know, you got something for that, you know, extra expenditure. Certainly I did. And, you know, so, it was just felt fortunate, you know, to be in the position where we could do that. Although it did, you know, there were consequences. It limited, you know, how many games you could have because they were expensive too. Other systems were kind of out of the question. I didn't have a PlayStation or a Saturn during that generation or anything. And then, of course, like after that, you know, when I was older and online comes more into it, like the cost of importing just cratered. And I think sterling appreciated for a while there before the financial crisis kind of tanked that in the end of the aughts, but certainly the earlier part of that decade, you know, the importing was pretty good in the GameCube era and stuff like that. So yeah, N64 was very expensive and it was kind of limiting, but, you know, wouldn't say it falls into the outright regret kind of area. And then in terms of adult stuff, I think it's similar in my adult life to what John's talking about in terms of it's more the profligacy of 1,000 cuts kind of thing that I would fall prey to. I mean, with respect to the PS3 stuff that Spencer brought up there, like I have considered, like, yeah, you know, I mean, I had a PS3, but it was a Slim as well. So you know, it was kind of in the middle of that cycle and it didn't have the full backwards compatibility and stuff. So, I mean, it had some of the digital games, you know, to kind of catch up on some of the retro stuff that they had there, from, you know, the PlayStation 1 and 2 that I had missed out on because of, you know, spending so much money on N64 and whatnot. But, you know, it kind of occurs to me at times like, yeah, you know, if you could get your hands on one of those old, you know, earlier models, back that had the full hardware backwards compatibility with PS2, you know, and of course they all had, compatibility with PS1. So, you know, kind of maybe think about getting a Japanese one and getting some Japanese games. I mean, the Japan PSN for classics was way better than other territories. And I did avail myself of that for some games. You know, I had stuff like the Silhouette Mirage, you know, kind of Japanese version, you know, before it got localized and rebalanced and everything, somewhat, yeah, debatably well, shall we say, by Working Designs. And even though the Saturn version is regarded as the better version of the game, but of course, yeah, there is no equivalent like retro service for Saturn, so like you go get where you take. But you know, the idea of like, oh well, you're actually being able to, even with PSN, you know, in Japan, like there were a lot of stuff that wasn't there, you know, so it was like, oh, you could, you know, get, you know, kind of, you know, all these, you know, kind of online retro stores that I get old GameCube games and stuff. I could get, you know, old Japanese PS1, PS2 games, play them on there. But then, you know, when it comes to it and it's a, you know, pretty big sum of money, you know, not the Frankenstein ones there that Spencer's describing, obviously, even just like regular ones. It's quite a lot of money, and also the reliability, right? Which is why this mod exists, is because you just, especially this many years removed now, you know, from when those models were, you know, originally shipped, you just, how much use are you going to get out of it before it gives up the ghost? So I'm pretty decent at, like, I have a sort of impulse or an idea of something like that and say, no. What's weaker is when it's a lower level thing and it's like ostensibly, a bargain or something, right? So it's like, for instance, there was one occasion, I think, where I had the original release of Tatsunoko versus Capcom on Wii. So, I had a Japanese Wii. And, which was a bit of an extravagance, but again, I think I got my value out of it with regard to the Virtual Console was just so much more extensive over there. And, again, not to the degree necessarily of what you were talking about back in the N64 era, but the experiences were better, right? There was a lot of games on the Virtual Console on Wii that were, a varying quality in terms of their optimizations and compensations for being PAL versions and so forth. So, you just skipped all of that by having a Japanese Wii. And that was okay. But also you had some exclusives that, you didn't have to bother with like homebrew or, kind of, the freeloader or whatever for, there was some value in that, or relatively limited considering how easy homebrew Wii stuff ended up being eventually. But I had the original release of Tatsunoko versus Capcom, but of course it did, somewhat surprisingly get localized later. And it was like the updated version, right? It's like the ultimate version, like you would have for something like later, like Marvel vs. Capcom 3, right? They did it, and then whatever it was, less than a year later, it's like, here's Ultimate Marvel vs. Capcom 3 with a few extra characters and whatever. So it was, it was a slightly different game, what came out elsewhere. And, at one time I just kind of saw it on eBay and thinking, that's shockingly reasonable for that. And, it's like 4 extra characters, and how much am I ever going to play it? But I still bought it just because it's like, oh, look, it's in, surprisingly good condition, surprisingly reasonable. And, you get it. And it's like, how will I play it enough to justify even that modest outlay? Much as John said earlier with the 360, probably not is going to be the answer to that. But with stuff like that, I can kind of talk myself into it. Whereas, if it's a big, if it's running into the hundreds of pounds, or it's certainly, if you're talking about that Frankenstein mod where you'd be going into 1,000 or so, it's just, it's too easy to talk myself out of it at that point.
Yeah, there is certainly a point where I can. Well, this actually recently just happened with me, something that I've always wanted to really get into fighting games. Right, every time a Street Fighter game comes out or Tekken or something like that, I always pick it up and then I play it and then I just get distracted and start playing something else. Right, but this recently happened with I have a really nice fighting stick because again, I got tempted and I was like, okay, this is going to be the time I'm going to get into fighting games, right? Mm-hmm. So I got this really nice fighting stick for the Xbox, and so I picked up Street Fighter 6 on PS5 because it was on sale. So, and I've kind of been gravitating over to PS5 a little bit lately. So I was like, okay, well, probably the most, and with all those fighting games and a lot of the sports games, the biggest user bases are on PlayStation platforms at this point. So I figured, what the heck, I'll buy it on there. But I was torn because, I have this Xbox this really nice fighting stick, and it's really dumb for me to have this really nice fighting stick, and not be able to use it for Street Fighter. It makes zero sense. And so I was thinking, and so, man, I was sitting there and they have this on Amazon. They have this really nice Street Fighter brand. It's exactly the same fight stick. It's one of the, one of the Hori fight sticks. Mm-hmm. And they have one that's Street Fighter branded. Looks really sweet. It's like purple, has like the kind of like the Street Fighter branding on it and the big picture on the panel. The front panel of it. I'm like, oh man. But I'm like, no, this is so dumb. I would literally be buying the same fight stick and I would probably do the same thing where I would have this fight stick and just play with it for a little while and then abandon it, and it would be just a complete waste of money. Because I have done that. I've done that previously right around like Soul Calibur 6, maybe, I think it was. I did that. I bought a fight stick and I never used it, and I wound up selling it. But so what I did is cooler heads prevailed, and I actually found a really good adapter. I talked about it a while back, but that was one of those things where I talked myself off the ledge, but I just for a second there, I was like, man, I should just buy the stick. And then I was like, are you an idiot? Like, what are you doing? You literally have a working fight stick. Find some other solution that's cheaper. So the adapter costs like $60. So instead of paying like another $200, I talked myself off the ledge by just spending $60 and getting a perfectly good adapter that lets me use this Xbox fight stick with the PS5. But that's just, it's one of those things. It's like, I feel like I get latched onto an idea and I have to have it that way, and having it any other way, even though that it's entirely irrelevant, because I'll probably just move on to something else with the next shiny object. The next time another game comes out, I'll probably abandon this whole project. I'm very enamored of gaming projects, which gets me into trouble. And so it's just completely irrelevant. And also I have another solution that is completely fine for my needs sitting right in front of me, but it's not that. And I want that. It's like I'm a child, right? So I have to oh man, it's a struggle, man. It's a daily struggle.
I just posted a picture in the chat on Discord. Have you looked at it?
Yeah.
Do you remember? Do you remember that thing?
Let me see. Oh my god, I haven't seen this.
Yeah, so what Gilbert's posted is a picture of the kind of it's most analogous to the kind of mini consoles.
SNES Mini, right?
Yeah. But it's for Capcom arcade games, and so it has two arcade sticks, arcade kind of panels, but in the form factor of just a very large Capcom logo.
Yes. Yeah. And the buttons are there, but you can't see them because they match the color, literally what it is. It says Capcom, and the contour of the device follow the lettering. There's like a kind of a divot between the P and the C. There's anyway, it makes no sense. Also, if you're playing this, you're going to have to sit very close to whoever you're playing with if you're playing co-op. But it does have Alien versus Predator, the arcade game.
Yeah.
That's the one way that you can play this, apparently.
That is definitely the thing that I remember about it, because it may be a few other arcade games that maybe they haven't reissued as much, but it seems to be a bit of a kind of an additional window for some of these licensed games that are tough to kind of get back. Sometimes if it's just for a piece of dedicated hardware that's look, we're just going to sell a specific number of these and that's going to be it. It seems like that licensing deal is kind of easier to do than actually bringing it back to current platforms that would sell on a digital store or anything like that. So you do get these cases where you get some licensed games coming back in a particular sort of device, and it kind of makes you think about it, because I've always been interested in playing that AVP arcade game that I've heard about, but you definitely just not the outlay is one thing, but it is aesthetically very unappealing.
Yeah. Ultimately, it doesn't have much to do with this. I don't own this, thankfully, but it is £200 from this blog article that I found on Retronauts website, and it's called, if you want to look it up, Capcom Home Arcade, and it's pretty ugly, and At least, yeah, like as you were talking about your very nice branded Capcom fight stick, I was just thinking about this thing. It just sprung to mind.
Well, there's some similar things. You get like the eGrit Mini 2 or whatever it is, the Taito arcade like mini thing where it, like, you know, it's got a built-in screen in that case, right? But although you can just hook it up to the television through HDMI as well. You know, like that's kind of one part of it, but they have like these expansions where like you can get the extra controller that's got like the trackball and the spinner thing like on it or whatever, like the paddle controller type of thing. And it's again like that's kind of tempting. It's like, okay, I remember the paddle controller for the DS Arkanoid that John, I believe, does have, if I'm remembering correctly, that you could also use for Space Invaders Extreme on DS. And, you know, like you know, those sorts of like spinner controllers or whatever, like they are, you know, kind of, that is something I would like to be able to play those arcade stuff, you know, those experiences that were built around those, like with the actual input mechanism that, you know, was kind of there, you know, that was specifically crafted around those. But again, the prices are just too much. You know, you could get a certain amount of the way there, but, you know, it's just not quite all, you know, so controllers, you know, like these kind of very specific controllers, you know, with like, it could be, you know, drive-in controllers, flight sticks, you know, fighting game arcade sticks, all that kind of stuff. It's all very like appealing in oftentimes it sort of has been over the years, but it just can't quite kind of get there most of the time. But then, you know, if you took some of these kind of more incremental expenditures on, like as John mentioned, you know, the option to play a series of games and added them all up, you know, you might actually be able to fund one of these more, you know, kind of macro kind of purchases. And, you know, who's to say which would really provide more utility? I mean, I guess the likelihood is that it'd be pretty much a tie because it wouldn't be dreadfully much either way.
So it turns out maybe we didn't need you, John, for this answer, because I think I've got you both beat by a large margin. I just, yeah. So first I had one answer and then I realized like, oh wait, I've got a much more expensive answer also. So the first answer that I thought of was I got for free at some point, like, I think on Facebook, Karen had like a friend who was moving away and was advertising, like, it was giving away old consoles. So through that, I got a Sega Saturn for free. And it was like, you know, you can't really beat free. That's awesome. But then, like, how do you get your hands on something other than the Tomb Raider and forgettable driving futuristic racing game that it had where the car was in a ball for some reason. I can't remember what it's called, but it was not good. And a couple of other like forgettable, like Virtual Cop, which I don't think I can actually play anyway, and Virtua Fighter 2 probably, which was okay. Anyway, so I got a Saturn. Now what? I looked into the options. I thought that I would be stuck like burning CDRs of Saturn games. That didn't sound very appealing. I didn't want to go through that. Eventually, I learned of the Satiator device, which is basically, so the Sega Saturn, you could, I think it did have memory cards, or you could get a not a hard drive, but like an onboard memory thing that you could, you know, slot into the machine. But the same space was also like you could add RAM. So this device basically has an SD reader on it, SD card reader on it. So you can fill that up with ROMs and put that in the Satiator, which doubles also as like the RAM expansion, which is not used by a ton of games, but you know, it's nice to have. The problem is that the Satiator was like hundreds of dollars. It was very pricey for what it is. And I must have known somewhere deep in my heart that I would be in the exact same situation as you guys did. Like, we're talking about, like, oh yeah, like I just need to have like this whole collection of games accessible. I just need that. Am I going to actually play them? Yeah, no, I'm fooling myself into thinking I will, but like literally, I think I played like maybe like half an hour of Astal, which was a forgettable 2D platforming beat 'em up or something. It was not like, it was one of the very early Saturn games that I saw in a magazine back when like it was reviewed alongside Mario 64 and Intelligent Gamer, because of course I would be the kind of nerd who buys a magazine that's called Intelligent Gamer, and because I'm so sophisticated.
Right up there with Serious Gamer, my other favorite publication.
I'm just imagining them sort of next to each other on the shelf, with one has someone's face sort of musing with their hand on their chin, and then the other one is just like a furrowed brow, just absolutely inscrutable expression.
It's like, am I intelligent or am I serious? I don't know.
So I remember that game, so I checked it out. It's garbage, of course. You can look it up on YouTube, which is what I should have done in the first place before spending hundreds of dollars to check it out firsthand. And my idea was like, well, if I were to try to buy a copy on eBay of Panzer Dragoon, which one is it called? RPG? Now I forget the
Saga.
The RPG. Saga, yeah. So if I wanted to buy that, it would cost me hundreds of dollars. Might as well just pay those hundreds of dollars to play anything I want. But then, did I ever get around to playing Panzer Dragoon Saga? Of course not. I did play Zwei, though, the second one, which supposedly is being remade for the Switch, but that was announced 6 years ago.
Yeah, exactly. I mean,
they've moved on to remaking front mission games for Square, and those are also coming out very slowly.
And also doing Donkey Kong Country Returns HD, right? That's them.
Yeah. So
Forever Entertainment, right? That's what
forever. Yeah, named aptly named, because they take forever to bring us entertainment. Yeah, that was bad. I'm sorry. So that was pretty bad. That was like a big expense, and it was not just that. Like, I bought like an HDMI cable for the Saturn. I bought a nice I guess like 8-bit to Sega Saturn controller. I never actually used it. So yeah, that's throwing good money after bad, I think is the expression.
Yeah, sure. No, it can happen, I guess. I mean, I will say that's another area where I've been sorely tempted, and yet I've not quite been able to get to a place where I could say yes, is some kind of like upscaling solution for like my old consoles. Because, at this point, it's just like, I'm not even sure if I could connect them, to anything just directly with the current TV that I've got, unless, I mean, like it's still got components. So like Wii and GameCube, because I had the GameCube component cables, which apparently became quite rare latterly. But that's fine. But for N64, and Super Famicom that I've got, which were RGB modded for SCART output, there's no SCART on there anymore. And if there were, it would probably just look a mess anyway, because if it isn't like properly like upraised on a new kind of TV, it'll just look like a mess a lot of the time anyway. So if you're looking for something to get the job done right, that is expensive, and it's I would very much like to in a lot of ways, but again, especially when it's so much of how I play is portably, and obviously quite hardly all of it, but a fairly significant amount of my cartridge collection is kind of accounted for in service, NSO, the NSO service with the expansion pack especially. I just can't quite get there, but it's something I would really like to do, to be able to play some of those games, especially the ones, that haven't come back as much. in, a way that looks, good again. Because I haven't had like a CRT as my main display since 07, and so any time since then, for certainly my first like HD TV did have like SCART, the RGB SCART would work, so you could still play your old system, but you were already running into some of the problems that you get when you take that kind of image and just spit it out onto those earlier kind of HD flat panel displays. And now you can't even do that. So it's something it's probably, I get the feeling it's an itch I'm probably going to have to scratch one day in the way that you've kind of outlined some of these things, but it's just it's not there yet. And it's a bit similar with the Analog Pocket as well, where it's like, I would like a really nice device to play especially my GBA games on. I don't have that many original Game Boy and Game Boy Color games. But the thing is, it's bloody expensive for that purpose alone, and it's not expressly designed around GBA. The form factor is, and the screen dimensions are, primarily mimicking the original Game Boy. So you've got, there's apparently the shoulder buttons are a little bit awkward around the back, and stuff. Some people say, I'm sure there's different perspectives, but, if there was one that was more specifically like, this is the most badass GBA thing ever, like, they might get me at that point, even though, again, how much would I actually use it? There'd be certain things like Gunstar Superheroes and other stuff that's Astro Boy that have like never come back that I would be kind of eager to play in a way that looks great, but it probably still wouldn't be that much.
I find that I'm most vulnerable to that kind of thought of like, oh yeah, I should get like a really good thing that plays old games, or like most vulnerable at this time, actually, like at the end of Nintendo console's life cycle, except that this time Nintendo has managed the end of the Switch a little bit better than it did this is an understatement, the GameCube or the Wii. And so I don't have that as much of a strong pull to be like, well, I'm bored, there's nothing coming out, might as well splurge on this other thing here. But yeah, like it's usually that's when my bad decisions have happened. And the other thing, the definitely the most expensive thing, although now I'm thinking maybe I'm misremembering how expensive it was. The figure in my head was like $3,000, but I think it was more like $2,000. I got a really nice gaming laptop back right before the Xbox One and PlayStation 4 came out. Because my thinking was like, well, like more and more games are on PC, anyway, so might as well get that, and I'll be able to play it all. Like I'll have access to the latest and greatest games. But the thing is, so I bought like a Toshiba Cosmio. It was really expensive. I got it at Best Buy. It had like 16 gigs of RAM, which is a lot even today. But then like I returned it because I saw an ad at Costco where they had the same model but with 32 gigs of memory for the same price. So I returned it. I got that Costco one. And I was like, what a deal. But it was like, I think it's the most amount of money that I spent at once on a thing. Like because I've never actually purchased a car, I guess. So this was this is actually, well, okay. I also since then bought a condo. That's the biggest purchase. But
right.
Like back then, like it was just like an unthinkable amount of money that I would spend on myself. But I hadn't figured out yet just how important saving, like having like a rainy day fund and also saving for retirement was. So I just I was like, well, this is burning a hole in my bank account. Might as well get rid of this money on something nice. And then, I get it home and it just doesn't, like it ran Forza Horizon 2, maybe like 3 frames per second, the demo. It was not up to the task at all. And of course, like this was around the time that Windows 8 or maybe 10 came out. But anyway, like I was downloading the demo through the Microsoft Store, and I was like discovering just how crappy Windows is nowadays. And anyway, like it was kind of like bad experience after bad experience. And like ultimately, I never really used it for gaming all that much, but I still tried to make it work, like I again, like throwing good money after bad, like I tried to get like a Steam Link because I thought that will make it easier to play on a big screen TV, and so I will use it more to play games. And then I played maybe like a couple of indie games like Lovers, what's it called? Lovers in the Dangerous Space-Time, or Assault Android Cactus. Twin stick shooter, like these, smallish indie games that the PC could actually run. They were basically like XBLA games. Lovers and like both of them I think came out on Wii U too. So anyway, like
you probably wouldn't have played them really. You were just playing them because this is what worked on that machine and you wanted to use that machine.
Yeah, ultimately, that's not what I had bought the laptop for, but that's what I ended up using it for, because that's all I could do. I got this stupid Steam controller because I thought, well, okay, so I'll be able to use mouse-like controls even though I'm playing on the TV. Played Curse of Monkey Island that way with Karen, but it was not an optimal experience, and especially compared to the made-for console controllers remakes of the first two Monkey Island games. Like it's like there's no comparison. So again, like always disappointed. And yeah, like my experiences with the Steam Link, which didn't always work, and the Steam controller just made me like a lifelong Steam hater since then. Like people talk about like, oh, but like the Steam Deck is actually a really good experience. I'm literally the Anchorman, I don't believe you GIF. Like I just I don't trust them at all.
Steam Deck, yeah, for the most part, Steam Deck is great.
That's another
and rough around the edges.
That's another really, really tempted thing, because I might actually use that because it's fucking portable like that. Well, it's just a bit too rich at this point to talk me into. I just can't. And again, if we've added up all the stuff I don't actually, all the little spending on things that I won't play, you could you put a dent in it at least. But yeah, because that is the big thing, is just that it's a portable device and you get access to a pretty massive selection of games that themselves you could get at reasonable prices, is even with, I think it's fair to say, looking at the big picture, the surprising breadth of like the third party kind of games that we've ended up with on Switch is still so much, that isn't there.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, I mean, what I really liked using it for was, when I started getting into Diablo 4. And, I'm traveling and, I was like, man, I wonder, because I brought my Steam Deck instead of my Switch, and I was like, man, I wonder how Diablo 4 would play on this. And it plays great. I mean, it plays at about 30 something frame rate, but I mean, it's great. You can play it on your PS5 and then move right over and start playing it on your Steam Deck. So there's some use cases like that where the Steam Deck is really, really good. And it also, how it runs various games, it'll vary from game to game and you can tweak a lot of stuff, but it's a very useful device because I use it especially, sort of one thing that I constantly use it for is watching completely legitimate streams of sports that are hard to get in the US. So, but you can do that because you can hook it up to your television, flip over to desktop mode, and you have a Linux PC sitting there where you can browse the web and you can go to, do everything that you would do on a normal PC. So it's a very, very useful device, kind of a Swiss Army knife device, but yeah.
Yeah, ultimately the silver lining to buying that really expensive laptop is that I'm using it right now to record and to edit. Like it's still next year, I guess. Windows is going to start forcing people to upgrade to Windows 11, so I won't be able to use it anymore. But if I want to feel less bad about the purchase. I can think like, well, like I've had it for 12 years now, so really I'm paying like $160 a year for the privilege of getting a PC that lasted a long time. But it was ultimately a bad decision. That's why I went with the Xbox Series X after. Not that was not its own bad decision in its own way, but like
exactly.
At that point, like I was considering, like it was the choice between a PlayStation 5 or an Xbox Series X and not a PC, because at that point I knew like I'm not gonna get a satisfying PC for a price that I find normal, So I gave up. Like I'm all in on consoles, I guess, forever.
I went through this whole same thing where I always wanted. I was like, man, I am going to get the perfect PC and my life will be amazing. I'll be able to play everything on Steam, no matter what, whether it's keyboard and mouse or whether it's console. And then I remember at one point I had a PC. It was a pile of crap. I needed to replace it, but I remember I was sitting there playing a game, and all of a sudden I smell smoke, and I look over at my PC, and there's smoke coming off of the motherboard, so something was just burning, and then it just dies on me, and I was like, you know what? I am done with this. I'm just done with it. I'm not doing this whole PC arms race anymore, and I've been tempted over the years to maybe get a gaming laptop, like, $4,000, and you can have a gaming laptop that can just play literally anything, and the problem is, 2 years from now, that gaming laptop will be out of date. That is the problem. Whereas with the console, it's like, I just don't have to think about that. I buy it, it sits there, it does what it does, it runs games the way it runs them, and this is actually this is another thing where I no longer buy consoles that are special edition consoles, like the PlayStation, the 30th anniversary stuff that has the same color scheme as the original PSX. Mm-hmm. That stuff is so cool, and I would love to own that stuff, but I am never getting attached to any hardware that I own again. Ever.
Well, they're also it's sort of, I mean, we would have got this email before they unveiled the PS5 Pro. But, and I mean, I know the retro colours, first of all, I mean, I think they're in quite limited quantities, right? But they're not limited to the PS5 Pro either, right? There's regular PS5 models that get that colour scheme as well, which it looks better to me. Not just because it's retro, not just because it reminds you of the old days, but it just, the lower contrast, like it blends together better, like with that hardware design for me. So I'm sure they'll be very sought after and stuff. But yeah, we would have received this email before the sort of PS5 Pro price bomb went off. So, I mean, are you there day one for $6.99 or whatever it is?
No, it's just $700 for something that's really a marginal upgrade that works. I mean, I think right now there's a list of maybe 25 games that sort of take advantage of it. Some of them more than others. Obviously, the Sony titles probably take advantage of it more because they're in-house. It's just, I just don't see. I mean, at some point I'll probably get one. But this is why I don't roll with special edition consoles anymore, because that PS5 that I have out in my living room right now, if GameStop has a deal on a PS5 Pro, that thing is getting traded in, and I don't want to care about a physical piece of hardware anymore. I want that to be a commodity where I have no attachment to it whatsoever. I take that into GameStop, give it to them, and get, X amount of $100 off the next thing, and that's it. I just swap them out. Same thing, just like phones are the same thing. I've switched over to a plan where I effectively rent my phone now, and that bothered me for a long time, but I eventually just gave in, and now it's like I just do not care about these physical devices anymore. They're just commoditized to me, and I just trade them in on the next thing. And so that's why I do not, as much as I want that 30th anniversary PS5 Pro, I would never buy it, because that means I would never want to get rid of it. And I just want to get rid of these consoles. I just want to keep rolling them. I don't want I don't want to eventually have a whole house full of old gaming hardware.
Well, it's part of what makes the upfront cost more palatable, right? Is if it's actually there is some sort of an asset there, and yes, it'll depreciate, but it's still got some sort of value that you can cash in. Whereas, if you're thinking of it as a collector piece, apart from selling it to other collectors, that the point is you'd be stuck with it, and it's not fungible like at that point, is it? So, I kind of guess that's adds up. But I mean, I would assume in real terms, the PS3 $599 launch price that's referenced by Spencer there is still more expensive than the PS5 Pro, because you're going back to 2006 prices for that, and especially with recent surge in inflation, probably, which obviously is some of the reason why we are where we are, with the price of PS5s going up, especially outside of America and everything. It's still not as expensive as that, but it's it's pretty expensive.
It is. It's really expensive. Yeah. Yeah, it's just like $700 for that console at this point. It's just a lot, and that's why it's like I said, if I can trade in my existing PS5 on it, that's fine. Otherwise, I'm not going to touch it. But I mean, I didn't have a PS4 Pro either. I just traded in my existing PS4 on a PS5. So that's kind of what I do with these consoles now, and I'll do the same with Xbox when the next Xbox comes out. I'll just take my Series X and trade it in, or try to get some money for it, or maybe sell it on eBay or whatever. All right, I think we have time probably for one more email. So, Greg, could you read the next one?
Eric writes, can you provide an analysis of why Concord failed so hard? Rumoured budget of around $250 million, 8 years in development, and total sales of 25,000 copies, which Sony is now refunding completely after a couple of weeks on the market. It's a bigger failure than E.T. in 1982. It seems like it was a mediocre to decent game, but for whatever reason couldn't gain any traction whatsoever. On a similar topic, what do you think of a Nintendo hero shooter game? Could it be like Smash Brothers with tons of iconic characters and maps, but in the form of a very cartoonish hero shooter? Nintendo could include it free with online expansion pack memberships.
Yeah, Concord is it is remarkable. I think one of the problems with it, and this kind of speaks to the Nintendo hero shooter question, is that I feel like hero shooters in general, I mean, Overwatch came out in 2016. It's a long time ago. And Overwatch, as of now, well, Overwatch 2 now, it's struggling. And there's really no demand for hero shooters. And I just think that this is just kind of a classic case of this game, this type of game being released into a market that really didn't want it, and it's already, completely saturated. And this game didn't have anything at first glance that really made it stand out. It just looked like another kind of, and also too, it looked like it was kind of a ripoff of like the Guardians of the Galaxy motif. And so it got panned for that. And it's just a game where, it was being built probably kind of in a silo, and there was clearly no oversight, probably at a corporate level, to really, and you see this happen. I've seen it happen firsthand back when I worked at Turbine, when they were working on what was it, Infinite Crisis, which was supposed to be a MOBA going up against League and going up against Dota, games like that, and that game was out for, I think it was very similar. It was actually, I don't even think that game made it out of beta. If you look it up, I think Warner Brothers pulled the plug before that game even made it out of beta, because it was clear that nobody really cared about it, and it got no traction whatsoever. No influencers really latched onto it, or they played it for a little while and then dropped off of it. And so it was pretty clear that it was going to get no traction in the marketplace. And those games are all about traction in the marketplace, because they make all their money off of people buying skins and buying new heroes and stuff like that. So, yeah, this is just probably a game that should have been killed early on but they probably had nobody really looking over the market and seeing what people were after and what people were asking for. And
people were asking for LeBron James, if I understand correctly. The Smash Brothers, Warner Brother, I can't remember what it's called now, but
yeah,
you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
They gave it a second chance, right?
Yeah,
Multiversus, right?
Multiversus, right?
They released it, then unreleased it. Said, "Psych, this was just a big beta. We didn't tell anyone, but that's what it was. And now we're gonna work in secret on it." And then they changed engines and they added gremlins in there. I don't know. Like, I haven't followed since then, but clearly, that game got a second chance, but Infinite Crisis didn't.
Yeah, it definitely did not. I think Concord will. I think that it'll come back as probably free to play, but even that is, wow. I mean, I'm sure that this game on a certain level is pretty good, but it's just, there's so many other games like it on the market that it's just, I feel like sometimes game companies, they just don't realize when a genre has just been done to death. They don't realize it.
Well, I guess
that's the thing. I listened to this, to Player One podcast, and one of the hosts was playing Concord and was enjoying it quite a lot. But he was saying that it's actually not a hero shooter, which I don't know enough about the subgenres to really understand in what way. But I'll take his word for it. But also, it seems like their plan was like, yeah, we'll release something that's similar to these games that people like Overwatch, but it's not going to be season-based, or it is, but not in a way, like, the plan seemed to be, we're going to put this out, people are going to pay $60 once, and we're going to release content for a year, and they're not going to have to keep paying for it. And maybe they thought that was a winning proposition, but it turns out that, if no one buys the game in the first place, there's no way that they can keep it up. There's no way they can keep supporting the game. And we basically, all the marketing we saw was like there was this one trailer that Sony put out that was very much story showing the story, but very little of the gameplay. And then that was kind of it. And so like you could see that Sony kind of gave up on it very, very quickly after that initial kind of frosty reaction.
Yeah. They put it out to die pretty much. And it just feels too like it probably had nobody internally that really wanted it to succeed. It feels like it's
no champion.
It feels like it was kind of probably an inherited game. That because I think because Sony actually, they acquired the company that was creating this game, right? If I remember correctly.
Yes.
And so this game
as the studio was running out of money, basically. The game was in danger of not coming out, so Sony bought them, and the game did come out. we can say that about it. It came out.
It came out all right. And this was, of course, during the time when, there was a certain point in time a couple of years ago where Sony was all about live service games. Like, this is when they also bought Bungie, which is another questionable purchase entirely, as Bungie has just had layoff after layoff after layoff, and they're trying to pretty much convince people that like their player base for Destiny 2, that Destiny 2 is actually going to stick around. They have they just released a 3-year roadmap, but that's the same kind of thing where the player base is just like, I don't know, is this game going to be here in a couple more years? Should we even bother playing it anymore? They're questionably run as well. And so I feel like Sony overall got onto this sort of live service game bandwagon, and they didn't, I think they got a whole bunch of companies, or well, not a whole bunch of them, but they bought a couple of companies who I think they thought knew what they were doing in terms of live service games. And I think they're finding out that those companies weren't as good at running live service games themselves as Sony thought they were. and that it's a really keeping those games going and keeping the player base engaged is an entirely different beast, because Sony is really good at releasing single player games that don't have a whole ongoing thing and community, kind of like maintaining a community and keeping them engaged. They don't have that. They're used to like releasing The Last of Us, and maybe The Last of Us has some DLC and that's it. But eventually the development wraps on that game, and Naughty Dog is on to the next thing. And, maybe they remaster it. Like, that's what Sony is really good at. And so these live action games, I mean, there's very few companies that do it really, really well. I think Blizzard does it well. But even those games, I mean, how many times have you seen somebody say, World of Warcraft, it's dead. It's dead. It's dying. It doesn't have 12 million users anymore. It's gone down to 7 million. So it's on its way out. Right. And it just feels like it's a constant struggle where you're always just trying to convince the player base, and every single expansion that comes out is heavily criticized. And, it's like a constant kind of warfare sort of thing that I don't think Sony was really ready for. And sort of a game like Concord, where it's just kind of checks the check boxes, isn't really going to do it, because there's a lot of games that, if you look at, even just using the World of Warcraft example, if you look at the games over the years that have come out, because there was a time, just like all of this kind of stuff, like everybody saw Fortnite, and so everybody had to, put out a battle royale, and the same thing with Call of Duty. Everybody had to have something that went against Call of Duty, right? Like Battlefield and all that kind of stuff. With World of Warcraft, you saw the same thing. You saw all these games like, like City of Heroes, and I think, like WildStar, if I remember that game correctly. There were all of these kind of MMOs that were really good, that were supposed to be like WoW killers. Like, everybody's trying to kill WoW, but WoW is still here, and all those games are gone. Just because I think there's only so much time that people can devote to these games, really. That's the thing with live service games, is that I think these companies really have to ask themselves, okay, people like this type of game, but are they going to leave that game? Like, if you, again, I always go back to Facebook. It's like, people are still on Facebook, right? And you're not going to come out and replace Facebook with something else, because people are just going to say, okay, why would I even bother moving over to that? Like, people that have spent years and years. And so, people that have spent years and years in other games that are similar to Concord, what is going to make them move over to Concord? Probably, it's going to take a lot. It's going to take a whole lot. That game has to be really, really good in order for people to move over. And it's probably not different enough. I mean, if you look at something like Helldivers 2, right? That's different enough for people to like jump ship to that game, but even that's struggling. These games are just, live service is just tough. I mean, those games, you have to really hit the mark with them, and you have to keep it up over a long period of time, and not many companies can really do that successfully. I mean, and if you look at the real successes in that space, it's like World of Warcraft, which is backed by Blizzard, which is a huge company with a ton of money, and Final Fantasy 14, which is also backed by a huge company with a ton of money,
and also
the
kind
rocky
of
start.
Failed, basically before it succeeded. Which
exactly, right?
Which is where that backing comes in, right? If they hadn't had that backing, it wouldn't have been afforded the opportunity to like, okay, let's take a step back and kind of reconfigure this thing into something that can be successful. Like, not a lot of projects are going to get that kind of latitude afforded to them, by a legacy brand, a big company kind of supporting it, kind of almost be too big to fail in that way, for the ignominy that it would have had if they just kind of left it at how it initially bombed, basically. But I mean, I can't say, this is an area I know terribly much about, or certainly not Concord specifically, but it just seems to me like the scale of these things now, with the complexity of the development and, like you said, the kind of demands of the players, if you are going to credibly, lure them away from, the kinds of games that you're ostensibly trying to compete with, the scale is so vast that it's going to take such an amount of time and money to get to that point. You're always then going to be at risk of fighting the last war, right? And that sort of seems like what you've had here. Like you said, 8 years when Overwatch was new, right? And then, you know, like you said, things have changed for Overwatch. Things have changed for live services in general. But by the time you actually kind of show up to the battlefield ready to go, it's completely different than you thought it was going to be when you set out, and you don't have the right tools for the job anymore. So it has to be, you know, because the costs involved on that continuous support are so big to go along with that scale, then you have to be very, very successful to justify that. Otherwise, it is going to be, you know, throwing good money after bad, and they're going to pull the plug on you. So, unless it's, you know, FF14, basically. So, it's, the pathway for success for something like this seems to be incredibly narrow. So in many ways, perhaps it should have been more of a story if Concord had actually succeeded, rather than, you know, people making a big deal out of the fact that it didn't. That seems the more natural, the more predictable outcome is that, you know, you go for, you make this play. It's far from, you know, a particular likelihood that it is going to work. And that's kind of interesting, the idea of, you know, Nintendo ever kind of going into a similar area. Splatoon obviously is the most analogous thing that they have, both from the point of view of being a shooter, you know, a team-based shooter, but also, like, it's not like a live service game in the sense that it does not depend in terms of its sales model on, you know, people coming in and buying a bunch of microtransaction stuff, as you mentioned, John, you know, bits of gear and all that kind of thing. Even though, like, they're almost kind of set up for that, you know, it feels like, you know, it is, you know, a game that people paid $60 for 2 years ago, but it's got a lot of the trappings of seasons and, you know, trying to get you to play regularly to, you know, keep earning different rewards and bits of gear and events and freshening, you know, trying to freshen things up with new stages, weapons, variants, all this kind of stuff. It's got so much of that, you know, kind of analogous kind of stuff, but it hasn't got obviously the monetization model, and you wonder, is that a bridge they'd ever cross down the line? Of course, now Nintendo's whole business model is, you know, a little bit different from everybody else's, and a lot of that hinges on the fact that, you know, they've had some sort of control on development costs that the wider market has not exercised. And, you know, I guess the yardsticks are going to move again with the new system in terms of, you know, it will be more powerful, and we don't know how much that's going to cost yet, and therefore, you know, how much of the game's going to cost, and, you know, how much of their development costs going to increase with it. And I don't know if that changes their kind of willingness to entertain the idea. For a long time, they were so adamant of, like, we are Nintendo, we ship you finished products, you pay for them at the end, right? And then inevitably, well, you know, times were a bit tough, like 3DS and especially Wii U. But also, it's just like, it's too much money to be made from DLC. You know, it's just stupid, right? I mean, it's just like, there are, especially, you know, your most enthusiastic players essentially are just more, they would have been willing to pay more for the thing in question up front, let alone, like, oh, you're going to actually get more content as well. So, you know, it was always inevitable that they'd soften on that. Now, does that sort of softening and, you know, and what we've seen with games like Splatoon, where, you know, you get to this point where it's, for 2 years, we're going to keep, you know, doing certain things, you know, to kind of, freshen the game up and maintain the engagement of the player base. Do they ever get to the point where they feel like, actually, you know, we could do that and, you know, kind of monetize it? It's dangerous in certain areas, right? Because you risk, you know, kind of appearing more predatory than, first of all, I mean, I think there's a general impression that these practices are predatory as they are. But when it's Nintendo doing it, I think they may be held to a more harsh standard because of, they've cultivated this notion that they're, sort of a bit, they're more family friendly, they're more conscious of those sorts of concerns. And it's like, your younger players are kind of safe with us and all that. So it'd be a dangerous place to go, for that kind of monetization model. And then just in terms of the genre and all that, it's like, like trying to do it with other Nintendo characters and stuff. It just, I don't know, it feels like it's a bit, with how big Splatoon has got, especially in Japan, feels like it's just a bit too close to that, its turf at this point. And probably, they'll just expand Splatoon itself, right? More crossovers with other Nintendo stuff or various things, like just use that as the kind of base for whatever you want to do in that space in the future.
Yeah, I feel like too, just from a business standpoint, Nintendo tends to be pretty conservative, and I'm sure that they look at some of the live service game models, and they look at it and they say, okay, so you're telling me that I have to spend up front $300 million to develop this game, and then I put it out, and then I have to spend even more money to make more money? That's the thing. I always get the kind of sense like a lot of these live service games, Final Fantasy 14 aside, are American, kind of go big or go home sort of mentality. Like, we're gonna put this money in, and then we're gonna spend a lot, but man, over time we're gonna make all of this money back. And it's almost like this gambler's mentality sort of thing with a lot of these live service games where Destiny too, it's been like that for a while, where I've just been sitting here saying, this game is clearly collapsing under its own weight. As soon as they started to literally take content out of the game, because they clearly did not have the staffing to support it and could not afford to pay people to test their own game, I was like, this game is in trouble. And that was like 2 years ago. And it's been slowly, it's Destiny 2 is still around. It's still doing okay, but it's just, over time, these games are very, very expensive to run because you have to run, you have to have so much, there's so much overhead to run these games, and I think some of these companies just underestimate it. But yeah, I think that's going to wrap us for this week. Greg, what do you have for music?
Well, James has mentioned in the past that he's got a number of requests sort of on file with me from a number of games that he's played over the last few years. And I was given the occasion to consider it to be time to pull one of them up here because I saw this yesterday. I think it was originally announced a little bit earlier in the week. But Atlas announced that Unicorn Overlord has crossed 1 million in sales, which of course James spoke about earlier in the year, playing through that with its, it's somewhat, not in perfect overlap, but with, Ogre Battle and stuff. It was an anticipated game. I played the demo and was impressed by it. I've just haven't sort of got round to playing it, but certainly something I might consider getting to later on. But so James had a couple of requests there, and one of them was a late game one. So it was kind of like, well, you kind of maybe give that a bit of time before we would use it. But now, on this occasion that they've crossed the 1 million mark, which I hope is something that's kind of compatible with that game being a success for Atlas and in particular Vanillaware, the developers, because I know, I'd assuming something about the sincerity and accuracy here, but in the kind of interviews surrounding the game's release, they did sort of suggest that they pretty much just put everything into it. Like they did, there was no slack. They spent all the money that they had to make that game game as good as it could possibly be. So, I hope that is working out for them on that basis. But as you'd imagine, the soundtrack is a very significant part of the experience, and the sort of late game pick that James made is itself actually called Unicorn Overlord Battle. So it's that's the name of the track, Unicorn Overlord Battle, because it is seemingly, having not played it myself, a very significant kind of part of the late game. And when you hear the track itself, I think you get the idea just from that straight away of something that is very high stakes, very grandiose, but also really well executed.
All right. Cool. And with that, I think that will wrap us for the week. Thank you, Guy. Thank you, Greg. And we will see everybody next week on Radio Free Nintendo. Later.
Bye.
Bye-bye.